The research really just pushed that to the surface. We can get people together, we can gather them, and they might even grow, but we miss the Great Commission, which is to go. Your small group can say, "Hey, we exist because we want our families to grow. We want to disciple our families, but we also want to impact the families in our neighborhood." That has that external push, and as you do that, then that internally it helps your group grow actually 2 to 3 times more.
Hey guys, Frank here with another episode of Modern Church Leader. Excited today to talk to Jason, who heads up small groups at a pretty awesome church. And I'm particularly excited to talk to you just because I feel like the pandemic and all the crazy has affected church life just in general, but I've even felt in my own small group and our church's small group. So you're the first guest I've had on that really focuses on the small group ministry. And, I can't wait to kind of dig into it. So Jason Sniff, glad to have you.
Yeah, Frank, thanks so much. It's an honor and maybe a little bit of pressure if I'm the first one. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, the first one there's always a first, right?
Right. I'm excited for it. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to just start out by giving you the floor for a little bit and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into ministry. Yeah. I know you're a basketball coach, which we kind of have that. And well, I'm not a coach, but the love of basketball in common. But yeah, just how you got into ministry and how you got into small groups. And I know you even wrote a book on small groups. So kind of give us the story. Yeah,
you bet. I'll get to that in a second. It seems like this ministry thing's been a journey, right? So I got about 12 or 13 years working with college students in university settings, and both from a student life standpoint, but then also counseling. That's my education is counseling as a licensed counselor. And so I really just like the development and see how people go from one place to another, from here to there, whatever language you want to use, right? I'm just always been intrigued by that just because of my own journey, and then also just seeing what God does in other people. And so in the midst of that, my wife has a youth ministry degree, so I always like to say she's actually the one that's the real pastor, because I have counseling isn't always count that way. Anyway, long story short, we volunteered at our church, Eastview Christian Church, which is where I've been on staff for just over 11 years now.
And where are you guys located, real quick?
Sorry, what was that?
Where are you guys located?
Oh, yeah, Eastview Christian Church. Yeah, this is funny. We're in Normal, Illinois. And
there you go, Normal, Illinois.
Right. It is such a place. I would like to quickly say that we, as in my family, don't claim to be normal. So we are just on the edge of that.
You got the Duck Dynasty beard going on and the bald head and everything. So I feel like there's a Harley somewhere.
That would be great. We did have a 12-passenger van. Now we're into the minivans. I'm hopefully getting into the Harley soon. That would be great.
Let's go.
Yeah, right. I'm on that. Anyway, I backed into ministry, just helped out and volunteered, particularly in our youth area. And then they asked me to start training adults because that's kind of what I did in a university setting. And then got a call from our youth minister that just said, "Hey, we have an opening for small groups here at Eastview." And I told the small groups pastor that you're probably the guy, and so you need to call him on Monday. This was a Friday. And so I was like, okay, got nothing to lose here. I've always kind of thought that we'd end up doing something like this. And then God's got some cool things going. And 11 years later, here we are. And now I've moved up into the pastors of small groups for our church. And really, we're kind of 3 areas. We're involvement, we're member care, and we're small groups. And so we tackle all things adults and have a blast and a lot of challenges along the way. So yeah, it's kind of fun. In the midst of that, a longtime friend that I've known for about 15 years, Ryan Hartwig, he wrote a book called Teams That Thrive a while back with Warren Bird and through IVP. And that's a really good thing. It's about leadership teams and what really helps them thrive. And so he's like, hey, let's try one with small groups. And so he, myself, and then our colleague Courtney did some research for about a year and a half, about 100 different churches across the country that had small groups. And we just said, give us your best ones. And we spent some time interviewing their leaders, but then also their small group members. And so that's kind of an area that didn't have much information on. And so we just took all that, pieced it together, it's not here's what we do at Eastview that works for you. It's here's what research says, and some trends, and here's some shifts. And so there's some cool
Right.
stuff that's in there, and maybe we'll get into that today. Maybe we won't.
I feel like you're gonna have to write volume 2, like in about like 12 more months maybe, and it'll be all in like small groups after a pandemic. And has anything changed? Maybe not in the core fundamental of what makes a great small group leader, and but some ways that they're happening might have shifted.
Yeah, well, case in point, Frank, this book got launched in August of 2020, right? So we're still in the heart
Oh
of.
really? So it's pretty new.
It is new, and then but just some of the things in there are based off of meeting in person, right? But a lot of the information I think transcends either whether you're in person or whether you're online, and so there's still some good stuff in the midst of that. But we're like, okay, how do we promote this thing when churches may or may not even be meeting?
Right.
But what we found, this is super interesting. What we found is that for a number of churches, if you had a core DNA, core culture of groups, it really helps sustain churches through the times in which you couldn't gather corporately along the way.
Right. And so the title of the book is Leading Small Groups That Thrive, or Small Groups That Thrive?
Leading small groups that thrive. Yeah.
Leading small. Okay. Everyone should check it out. I mean, I'm already interested. So,
Yeah.
I mean, let's start there, because I think it's interesting. I mean, it's pretty new. So I don't know, in your mind, what are some of the highlights from the research you did and the interviews you did with members and leaders? Like, if you could give someone the cliff notes, what would be, a few of those highlights?
It definitely won't give away the whole book, but I'll just say what was really impactful for me and for what we are trying to do here at Eastview, because again, it really impacted our own ministry along the way too. And it was, some of these things are pretty, when you hear them, you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But to implement them is another thing, right? So one of those is that every group not only needs to have a defined purpose, but it's got to be external, outside of themselves. And some ministries really handle this really well from a cultural spot, but a lot of folks are like, okay, we can get people together, we can gather them, and they might even grow, but we miss the Great Commission, which is to go and take what we're learning with us wherever we go as we go. And so the research really just pushed that to the surface. Like, if Frank, if your small group can say, hey, we exist because we want our families to grow, we want to disciple our families, but we also want to impact the families in our neighborhood, or we want to impact the families at Grove Elementary, whatever the closest school is to you guys, that has that external push. And as you do that, then that internally it helps your group grow actually 2 to 3 times more over the long haul. And so you actually, as you focus outward, you grow inward. And again, that's not rocket science, but to get that into action is something that helps. It can be a shift kind of in focus along the way.
How did you, maybe a question or two on each of these as you throw them out, like, how were groups doing that? Or what did you hear as you were talking to folks about, like, how they practically make that, just real in their groups' day-to-day lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I personally think there's a lot of creativity that comes with this. Certainly it's got to have intentionality and genuineness. But so some ministries really already kind of create that for folks. Like, hey, we partner with these 4 organizations within our community. And we've opened the door, and here's the pathway for groups to walk on. And so that's actually pretty clear and clean for the most part. I mean, there's some work that ministry folks can do on that. But there are a lot of folks that kind of left that up to each group to really say, who are the people and who are the places? That's the language I like to use. Who are the people and places around you that you can directly impact, that you have a connection with at least a couple of days a week, or you have, it doesn't take too much of a reach to get to them. And so some people, some churches really focus on schools because most kids go to a school, or even if they're homeschooled or even a private school, there's a community that's there that can be supported. Some people would latch on to a local organization, whether it's a food bank or whether it's homeless shelter. Those are a lot of the things that kind of rose up. What we found then, even through the pandemic, as we were kind of promoting books and just hearing from folks, is there were so many needs that arose, very specific, tangible needs, a family that's in need. So you could adopt a family That's very specific, but it creates a journey and a relationship, and so that you kind of get that spectrum of opportunities. But really, at the end of the day, it's just about being aware of what's around you and who's around you.
To your point, having the group collectively know that we're outward focused and making that part of the group kind of ethos and the dialogue and the leadership talking about it, and kind of making it an always active part of what the group does, even when they're
Right.
gathering, like
Right on.
for different things, like making it part of what everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
Keeping it top of mind. What do great leaders do? Like small group leaders in your research, what stood out about kind of great
Yeah.
small group leaders? Because it's not for everyone. I kind of ask it with like, not everybody wants to be it. Not everybody thinks it's their kind of gift or skill set or whatever. But some people are really good at it.
Yeah, you're right, and I think that it's important for us to figure out what are the essentials that we would like in leaders. And I think in this day and age, that word alone really pushes people off from jumping in. Like leader, oh, I'm not a leader, right? They think of somebody that's up here, and they always view themselves right here. Yeah. And in reality, that gap isn't as big. And so to answer your question, I think that good leaders help others. They show others that it's easier than you think it is to do this. And we really highlight a couple of things. We call it a catalytic leader. And so that's somebody that doesn't just come in and do everything, but they allow for space for others to jump up and in a little bit more. And it's kind of like this dance. I like the phrase, it takes two to tango. You can throw that into whatever dance move you want there. But it really is kind of a give and take. And so good leaders recognize, hey, I need to start stuff, but I can't be the one to continue with it, because then everyone just looks to you all the time. And then then you're stuck. You create lanes and ruts. And so you really try to level that playing field. There's lots of ways to do that, lots of techniques, or lots of tips. But somebody that's savvy enough to draw others into just a little bit at a time. Hey, Frank, you're a good question asker. Would you mind next week facilitating our discussion? Here's the 4 questions that we have. Right. You give it to you ahead of time. You got some time to think through it. So whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, you have some space with that, and you just allow for that to kind of swell up a little bit. That's one of the ways that somebody can become a catalytic leader.
What about small group meetings? Did you guys dig in at all to the format or the location or the practical stuff, like what makes a great small group time? Because different churches, small groups are kind of, they've been around for a long time, right? We're not reinventing the wheel here.
No, right.
But you spent a little time talking to folks and kind of getting a perspective from 100 different churches and groups from all over, not just kind of a single church and how they're doing it there. So I think that's interesting. Did you guys dig into that at all? Like kind of what makes a great small group meeting?
Yeah, it's for some people this is really exciting. For others, they're just like, boring stuff. But logistics, we call it logistics, right? And so on average,
that already like leader probably turns some people off. They're like, logistics, I'm out.
I'm out, right? I just want to meet with people. Yeah, I totally get it.
Where's the food?
Yeah. But from a timeline standpoint, now this is for in-person, right? So we have to kind of couch it a little bit. Yeah. For in-person groups, we found that between 2 hours and 15 minutes to 2.5 is probably the optimal time. And that time is not all spent studying God's word, which is always great. It's not all spent praying, which is good. That's good stuff. But it's a combination of worshiping. It's a combination of just announcements and connecting with people. Like, hey, we have this coming up. And particularly if you have a purpose, it's a time to say, hey, as a reminder, we're going after this, and we're going to be meeting with this school this week. We have the opportunity to celebrate and do a lunch for the teachers. It's that kind of interactions intertwined with getting into God's word. But then at the end of the day, it's time towards the end to say, okay, now how are we going to live this out, and how are we going to stay connected through the week? And so logistics wise, it's 2:15 to 2:30 that we found that was kind of like a sweet spot all along the way. In the midst of that too, there's other things like you can spend too much time praying, which is so weird for us to say, as ministry folks. Like, it's got to be intentional in how you pray. If you're praying for people, if you're praying for your neighbors, those things seem to rise up to the top as some healthy things within the group. If you're praying for, heaven forbid there's cat lovers that are watching this, but if you're praying for your cat who is, on its last leg, so to speak, like that's okay. But it doesn't bring life into the group.
Right.
And so intentional praying is kind of what we draw out a little bit.
Right.
Those elements make a difference.
Hey man, these people are much more committed than me. 2.5 hours. My small group is definitely not hanging out for 2.5 hours. Like,
It's a long time.
I'm in a stage of life with like small
Yes.
kids and all the things that I think maybe has a little bit of a bearing. The other thing is like food. For me, it's like if we're not eating food, it just like eating together changes everything. I don't know. Maybe that's personal preference.
Well, to that point, Frank, I forgot to mention this. That was an element that pushed it that long, was if you eat a meal together.
If you're
then
having
you
a
have
meal,
that,
it
right?
extends it.
Yeah. And then, a lot of folks are still doing Zoom gatherings or online is probably the better way to say that. And that we have found that it's more, if you closer to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, because you get all the senses that are intertwined and you can become, fatigued. We've kind of all learned a little bit about that. And so in that scenario, the leader's got to be more directive and needs to be able to kind of just keep people moving, call on people, sequentially, that kind of thing to get people involved. So that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, let's shift. Look, first off, I mean, people should go check out your book. So we'll make sure it's in the
plug. I
show
appreciate
notes and all that kind of stuff. Because I think it's cool. And I think churches and even small group leaders or aspiring small group leaders, like reading something really, helps inspire and motivate and give you ideas and all that. So, I just think it's good for people to keep reading. So I love it when people come out with great resources like yours. So get the book, and then you launched it in August.
Yeah.
Pandemic was here, and things just went like bonkers, right? Like churches got disrupted like crazy. Everybody's not meeting in person, and then meeting in person. I mean, it's just all over the place now. We're kind of maybe in a stable place now. It's different, but maybe it's kind of what stable looks like for the time being. But I don't know, what's the impact been on small groups? What have you seen kind of in your own, in your home church, and what have things been looked like over there?
Yeah, I think we're pretty fortunate. I like to say just the Holy Spirit kind of had set the stage for us well before we knew anything about COVID. We did some trainings a couple years before that, but really tried to bolster our groups to think of themselves as mini churches. And we kind of use that language. Like, what if we could not gather corporately on a Sunday? How would we continue to spur one another on? And there's nothing prophetic about that, but it kind of played itself out. And it was really neat to see, percentage wise, I'm into kind of that stuff. So we had about 86% of our group stay online. We certainly had a lot of folks that just said, hey, we're meeting through in person all the way through. And we're like, hey, you're adults, do your thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do your thing. But that really sustained it. And so,
So you're saying, just real quick, like when kind of lockdown hit, 80 something percent of them went into like a digital format of some sort, started doing Zoom or whatever else they could dream up, FaceTiming everybody. But then 20-ish% or so just kind of kept meeting in person. So most groups, kept meeting in some format.
Yes. Yeah, and that really, personally for us and our church family, that sustained us, and that allowed space for, leadership to really figure out how do we want to, utilize our online campus? How do we want to still connect with people? It actually helped us, going backwards in our conversation a little bit about the purpose. There were needs that arose within our community here in Bloomington Normal, and most of it had to do with food and distributing of food to people. And so it was a bit easier to mobilize groups to say, hey, United Way is passing out lunches over here at this community center, and we need 2 small groups to go do that. And they responded and went and did that. Our own family, that kind of became a staple for us of let's just go and connect with people and meet their needs, even if it's food, whatever it might be. And so having that core of groups helps sustain us, both support internally, but it actually allowed us to quickly get external along the way, I think. So, but I think in large, if you blow it up a little bit, I think there are a lot of churches where it was a struggle to get people to stay connected, and so they might be in a season where they're trying to start things back up again along the way. So certainly our experience, I wouldn't have said had happened for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think mine's anecdotal, talking to different churches here and there. Even my own home church, like I think groups definitely helped sustain things from what I hear, but I also hear getting them back going. Like
Yeah.
Zoom groups, like I was like fed up personally, right? I was like, I can't do
Right.
this. This is terrible. Like, I don't get to hang out. I don't get to give you a hug. I don't get to eat a meal. Like, meeting with you on Zoom is what I do for work.
Right. Right.
It's
It
not
was
what
an
I want to do for
extension
my
of it.
small group, right? So I
Yeah.
was in that kind of boat personally. And anybody that was does kind of online work, right? I'm sure kind of had similar sentiments. So how'd you guys deal with that? Like, if
Yeah.
80% were online, how'd you
Yeah.
keep people engaged? How did you help the small group leaders do that well?
Yeah, I think we began to just give them not just tips like, hey, cut it shorter, 45 minutes to an hour. Certainly that was helpful. We gave them just some quick trainings on here's how to be more directive. But we also just said, this is now an opportunity to connect more individually outside of your group gathering. So text, call. At one point, drive-bys were kind of this thing, at least in our
Yeah.
area, drive-by birthdays. When I grew up, that had a different connotation, but
That was the thing here, though. Even where I'm at in San Diego, like drive-by birthdays, like the whole, parade driving down the street is the thing.
yeah. Yeah. So a whole different, meaning these days, but we just encourage that kind of stuff. Any way that you feel comfortable to interact and get close to people, man, that really helped early on. And you're in San Diego, so it's nice all the time. In Illinois, it's just nice from like May to September.
Yeah, it's a pretty cold, like I have a sweater on. I think it's like 68 degrees right now, maybe 64. It's a little chilly.
Yeah, thanks. 37 degrees here today. Appreciate that. That's awesome. No, rubbing it in. But we just said utilize outdoor spaces because we're getting into the spring and particularly in the summer, and people begin to become more comfortable. And so we just were trying to use tips like that. The biggest piece was you don't have to meet in this same venue all the time. Figure out different ways.
Right.
One more leader tip that I think works regardless of a pandemic is that if you can mobilize those within your group that I like to call our gatherers, so people who others naturally gravitate towards or connect with, or somebody who just loves to reach out, you don't always have to be the one to do that, right? So like Frank, if you're kind of like the person that people respond to, I'd just be like, hey, can you connect with these 3 people this week? And you're like, great, I'm on it, got it. And it's not that I just, check it off the list, but it's okay, Frank's on those folks, I can go connect with these folks. And you begin to expand kind of the networking of a group. I think that's been helpful along the way.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. And I think just you guys being able to train your leaders and like have those conversations and spend time helping people think through that kind of stuff is really powerful, right? Because you might lead a group and just we're busy and we have jobs and kids and sports and all the things depending on your stage of life. Like that's where I exist, right? Like it's just extra to pull it off and do it well. And having leadership, I'm saying this even from a church leadership, like having church leaders like invest in the small group leaders and spending time with them and training them and doing small group with the small group leaders in a sense to help them is powerful.
Right on. Yeah.
Well, now that we're here, the book's out, the pandemic continues on, like what are you guys doing at your church to just continue to help your small groups to thrive?
Yeah, we've taken some of these concepts, kind of the shifts, if you will, and this was actually another interesting finding. We found that we were doing small groups all wrong here at Eastview. The numbers indicate, like the traditional size of a small group, 10 to 14, average of 12. Jesus had 12, right?
Yeah.
But Jesus was the only one that could do that.
That was the number. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So 12 is this holier than thou number through the years. The research indicated that smaller small groups or bigger small groups really created the optimal opportunity for growth. So
Yeah.
smaller meaning less than 7, and bigger meaning 16 or more. Because
Right.
if you get that big, you actually have to subgroup in some capacity anyway. So it might even just be safer to say smaller small groups. I think are the trend.
I'm gonna tell you like a funny, quick story related to small groups. Like I've had different ones along the journey, but most recently, I mean, this would be a few years back, but we had a small group my wife and I were leading that was if everybody showed up and their kids, which mostly you'd get most of them, there'd be 40 people in our house.
Right. That's a
And it
lot. That's a
was
big small group. Yeah.
yeah, it would get, I mean, I guess you've gone outside of small group at that point, but we had a lot of people had a lot of kids, and nobody had 6 like you, but we had lots of 3s, and
It adds up quick,
so
though.
it
Yeah.
adds up quick, right? And so you'd have 30, 40 people, but it was crazy, like really crazy, hectic, kind of chaotic, because you got all these kids running around of all different ages, from like newborn to 10-year-olds, like big range, lots of kids. But it was our stage of life, right? It was it was hard to do as a leader, right? You're hosting it. We had it at our house. We always had a meal. We did things like, potlucks, or different families would bring the meal and all kinds of stuff. So we did our best to spread it out, but still, nonetheless, when you're leading the group, you kind of take that responsibility on. But it was probably the best small group I've ever been a part of, because it was all of us like living life together and going through this phase together and
Yeah.
enjoying the crazy, but our kids getting together and doing kids Bible activities and lessons and these kind of family devotional style things, as well as adult things, and
Yeah.
just mixing it up. But it was crazy, and it was awesome, but it was really big. Like most people would be like, that's probably too big. And eventually, like, it was like, hey man, we need to like kind of split this thing up a little bit, because it's kind of crazy from a church leadership perspective. But nonetheless, it was awesome, and it was way oversized.
Yeah.
So just validating
You have
from
a
my
satellite church right there, right?
Yeah.
You just, pump in some worship and you're good to go. No, it's a little bit more than that. I understand, but
Totally.
yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Okay, I'm gonna hit you with a couple questions, unless you wanted to say something real quick.
Oh, I was just gonna on the smaller small and the bigger big. So
Yeah.
one quick thing that we are experimenting with is we just call them all church studies. So it's 6 weeks, everybody going through the same thing. Ironically, it was called On Purpose, and it was about everybody defining their purpose and their groups defining their purpose. But in the midst of that, we just gave an invitation for people to say, hey, who are 2 people or 2 couples that you just want to spend 6 weeks with and go through this study. And that was kind of that idea of the smaller small. And we saw a lot of folks decide to do that. And that is a kind of an indicator, at least within our community and context, that type of invitation people are open to. And then on the flip side of that, we just did bigger gatherings of 25 to 50. And we have found, at least this season, everything has a life cycle, right? But
Right.
in this season, that is also an invitation that people are saying yes to. It's kind of like your first taste, and so we use groups as a way to break that bigger gathering down into some sizable things.
Right.
But those are those. That's an
Did you
example of
do,
a big.
just to understand it a little better, because maybe I didn't catch it? So you would have your small groups, like, I didn't totally follow. So you have a small group, but then you would say, hey, pick 2 different couples you want to do something with. So essentially, like a semester or something like that, where there was like 3 couples or 3 families in a small group, and then the church had like a teaching that you guys did, or how?
Kind of. So with the current groups that we have, we encourage them to meet, first of all, and then to do some organic invitation. Who are the people around you that you just invite in because of that personal
Gotcha.
invitation? And then for those that we would just consider new to groups, we kind of gave them 2 options. So the first one was, hey, you probably know a couple people around you that aren't connected or that you want to just do this study with. And so we're going to give you everything that you need just to do it and to go that way. That was kind of the you and two friends.
Got it.
And then we also provided a bigger space for folks that first option just freaked them out about, right?
That's a
I'll
little
show
too
up
scary.
somewhere,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to invite anybody, right? And so
Right.
that bigger option was for those folks. And then we would kind of just pair them together and have them go through that experience along the way.
Right.
6-week
Got it. Okay.
commitment. Yeah, kind of deal.
Yep.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. Well, this is awesome. I mean, I could keep chatting small groups and all that, but for sake of time, I'm going to ask you a couple quick questions at the end here.
Great.
First one, is there a book that you've read, and it could be any time, doesn't have to be recent, but just a book that totally had an impact on you that has stuck with you for a long time?
Yeah, two come to mind real quick. The first one I read, this a few years ago in college, a while back, In the Name of Jesus by Henry Nouwen. And it really both helped me understand servant leadership, but really just spurred inside of me a heart to walk alongside of people and to really just see them exactly where they're at and how God sees them. And so I think that just stirred a lot of compassion and some evangelism inside of me. That was a long time ago. But then more recently, and I think what was a precursor for us with this book was Stetzer and Geiger's book, Transformational Groups. And they did some kind of precursor research to just kind of prove that groups are important and helpful. Mm-hmm. And we kind of took that and said, hey, we see that and we're going to go farther with that along the way. And so that actually... That transformational groups book helped our own ministry along the way to really push us towards purpose and push us towards being, we like to say the best for our community, not the best in our community. And so pushing us towards, we're going to meet and gather as groups, but to what end and what is our goal in the midst of that? So I'd say that was a pivotal book.
Okay. Love it. Love those. And so second quick one, podcast. What's a podcast that you're currently listening to that you're obsessed with?
Well, I jumped on the bandwagon, the Mars Hill one. I don't know if I've ever heard that. So I'm on the front end of that. That's a good one, I think, along the way. And then this is so weird. I listened to a couple of different economic ones. My brother-in-law is a kind of a financial guy, and so he's trying to get me into some of that stuff. I'm a ministry guy.
Which one are you listening to on like Bitcoin? I know there's one in there. If you're
No, I try to stay away from that. Anyway, it's all good.
the metaverse. I mean, we got to figure this stuff out. It's all a thing,
right? The obvious
give me one
answer
of
is
the financial ones.
Sorry, I was going to say the cheesy answer is the Modern Church Leader podcast. That's the good one, right? This is a good one.
But give me one of the financial ones, because it doesn't all have to be spiritual stuff. So what's one of the financial ones?
Oh gosh, there's one that's called X22 on there, and not actually X21, and it just talks about economic kind of pieces. And then there's another one that is called Money.us. And anyway, there you go.
That's a good name, Money.us. Okay, cool.
Okay. Moneytruth.us. Moneytruth.us.
Money Truth. All right, that sounds like a family couples kind of finance thing. All right, so last thing, where can folks go to find out more about you and your book?
Yeah, book-wise, thrivinggroups.com is the website, and there's some fun resources there that are free. There's a course that now we do with smallgroups.com that train up leaders. It's a 10-part video course, about 8-minute videos that help people start groups and then begin to help them walk through the shifts to make sure that they're thriving. And so that's helpful there. That's the website. We're also on Instagram, Thriving Groups. And then for me personally, my wife and I do this thing on the side. It's called Living on the Edge. Living on the Edge of Normal. And so we have an Instagram piece called Living on the Edge. And then there's a Facebook page that says Jason Sniff, Living on the Edge of Normal. And we, a while back, there was just some crazy thing during COVID where I'm like, there's so many people that have great stories that they wouldn't say that it's a good story. That's just their life, but that other people need to hear about. And so we just try to do a 10-minute thing and highlight a portion of somebody's story that hopefully will motivate other people and just to help them recognize that we just need to share our stories more, and it's okay to listen and to hear other people's stories. So it's kind of just a fun thing, but we do that as well. So
that's awesome. Say that one again. It's on Facebook. It sounds like.
Yeah, on Facebook, and then we also have an Instagram piece. It's called Living on the Edge of Normal.
Living on the edge of normal. That sounds cool. I'm gonna go check it out. Well, Jason, this has been awesome, man. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Frank. Thanks so much.
Yeah, super good. Well, guys, it's been great. Thanks. We'll see you next week with another episode of Modern Church Leader.